Welcome to Operation Exchange. This episode will go over child abduction and sensitive things like sexual assault and,
Abuse.
yeah, viewer discretion is advised.
All right, so today's episode, like you said, is going to be a little dark. It's probably going to be somewhat long, and we're covering the history of adoption in the U.S. and the child trafficking scandal of Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society in Memphis, Tennessee. So some key historical aspects to kind of get us up to the point where most of our story takes place today. Adoption became legal in the U.S. in 1851, and it had very little oversight. It was largely informal. Most of the adoptions that were taking place were by people who had farms or other means of needing a lot of labor, and they would adopt these children and have them work as free labor for them. So unwed mothers faced a lot of harsh societal judgment, and maternity homes often acted as adoption mills. If you were single and unwed and had a baby, you might as well have kissed your future goodbye at that day and time. So a lot of women put their kids up for adoption, and these places would buy them for cheap. That was until the Industrial Revolution came around and child labor laws become a thing, and it made it illegal for them to use children for labor. And so adoption rates decreased dramatically after this because no one wanted the illegitimate children of poor, lower class citizens. So no one was just jumping in line to adopt. That was until Georgia Tann came along. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, one thing we were talking about how cheap it was to adopt a child. It's like was it about $7?
Yes,
back then, and that was
equivalent to about $75 now.
Yeah, so you get one real cheap, and if you're just going to use them from labor, it just seemed like it was an extension of systematic slavery.
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to talk about Georgia Tann without bringing up human trafficking. And it's hard to talk about human trafficking without realizing that ever since there's been a civilization, that there's been class systems. And when you have an upper class and a lower class and a middle class and upper middle class,
lower middle class,
lower middle class, all that stuff, you have the endangerment of thinking one human is more valuable than the other. So we see it even still today. But Georgia Tann was born in 1891 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Her father was a judge. I don't have any information on her mother. Do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, her father was a judge. His name was George Tann, and so was her. Her name was Belua George Tann, which is kind of unique, but she went by Georgia. Judge Tann would often bring home abandoned children to his home, and he would require a minister, a doctor, and a teacher to come by, evaluate the child, and help him decide what to do with that. Georgia wanted to follow in her father's footsteps, maybe even just try to impress her father, because he wasn't very approving of her lifestyle. She was always a tomboy, most likely a lesbian. We'll get into that later. Not that it matters, but
at that time it did.
The key point here is, she was fighting for her father's approval most of her life. And so she did. She went to university and passed her bar exam. Could become an attorney, but he didn't approve of that. So he would rather. I think he set her up with a job at the Mississippi
Children's
Home Society, Mississippi Children's Home Society, and didn't take long. This was in 1922? No,
it was before then.
It was before then. I don't know how long she was there, Courtney.
It wasn't a very long stint of time. She was showing signs of corruption pretty quickly.
Okay. Well, she got fired. She got fired for taking impoverished children away from impoverished households with no reason to do so whatsoever. Her father used his political pull to land her a job in Memphis, Tennessee at the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And she started off as a executive secretary, and didn't take long. By 1924, well, some sources say 1924, some sources say 1928 or 29, rather, that she took over as executive director. So it didn't, she wasn't there long before she was completely over the entire operation. And what this operation was politically backed by E.H. Crump, funded by the mayor of Memphis, where they would take these kids away from families. Sometimes it would be a mother giving birth, and while she's still under the effects of anesthesia, they would have her sign paperwork as if it was just common standard practice. And by the time the mother sobered up and was wondering where her child was, she no longer legally owned a child. Right?
Yes.
Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Prior to her moving to Memphis, one of the things, her father had her major in music. Like, he thought that was going to turn her more feminine by learning to play the piano and becoming a music major. And she did do that, but she also got her law degree without him knowing.
He didn't know that?
No, like she did that in summer classes and stuff on her own to get that law degree.
Must not have been that strenuous.
Right.
I know it said, like something I read was she passed her bar exam, but her father didn't approve of her being an attorney.
Right. And that is like, even after she went through all that, she did the music, then she got the law degree, she passed her bar, and her father still did not want her to be a lawyer.
Right.
Believed that that was not appropriate job for a woman of that time. And
she was a school teacher at some point.
Right. She started out teaching school, and then she did the Mississippi Children's Home Society, got fired from there. After she got fired from there, she did go to Texas, and in 1922 adopted June, her daughter that she raised from that point on, and she was 31 at that time.
Yeah.
And then right after the adoption of June is when she moved to Memphis, and her father used his political connections to get her a job at the Tennessee.
I skipped around a little bit, huh?
It's okay.
But it was she accomplished a lot
in a short period of time.
A lot of corruption before she was middle age. I guess,
right.
It's kind of crazy, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, do you want to tell them what got us interested in this in the first place?
I guess I might as well. So we signed up for 23andMe, do the DNA thing. I didn't know anything about my father's side of the family. I mean, I do know who my father is, and I know like up to my grandparents pretty much. But as far as outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of family history. So I thought it'd be kind of cool, just to see where, it might lead. And it led to somebody on my father's side of the family reaching out and saying that their parents or one of their parents was adopted through the Tennessee Children's Home Society. I didn't think much about it, but that would be their blood relative that they're talking about. And they found that out on 23andMe as well. And that individual started talking to us about Georgia Tann. And then somebody, on my mom's side of the family contacted me and said, like,
hey, my mom was stolen.
My mom was stolen as a baby, and Georgia Tann sold her. So like this name popped up a couple of times within a couple of months from people that were which is maybe a little bit older than my mother's age.
Right.
And it was kind of interesting. So me and Courtney started looking into Georgia Tann. There's several good videos out there on YouTube. There's lots. There's a Wikipedia page. She does spell her last name Tann. But yeah, man, a very interesting individual. in a horrible type of way.
Right. Yeah.
But
And this was kind of like right up my alley as well because I'm into the genealogy. I've traced my family back several centuries, but like his family was difficult. His dad's side, I can't get very far.
yeah,
It's some of his mom's side, like
my dad's side, just just to be clear, is my dad is from Memphis, like so, and he was born in '53, which is just a couple of years after the Tennessee Children's Home Society shut down.
right.
So like, so a lot of these kids that ended up missing was about 5,000 children come up missing.
Yes,
in
they
Georgia.
believe she was responsible for. They know of at least 5,000. They believe it may be closer to 6,000.
Now, all these kids didn't stay in Memphis. They traveled all the way around the United States of America, from Maine all the way to California. Like a notable names. We don't have to get into that just yet. We ain't ready for that, are we?
It's okay.
So like Ric Flair, like the Nature Boy Ric Flair he's a wrestler. I'm not huge into wrestling, but I was when I was a kid, so I definitely know who Ric Flair is. But he was a child that was abducted by Georgia Tann and sold to another family. And then another notable name is Joan Crawford. She was. You ever see the movie Mommy Dearest? That was a movie about Joan Crawford, and I think it was written by one of her children. Was it Cynthia?
I think it was one of the adoptive ones.
Okay.
Cynthia, yeah.
So, and interestingly enough, one of Joan Crawford's adopted children.
2 of them.
Yeah, 2 of them, because they were twins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were born in Dyersburg, Tennessee, which is our hometown, mine and Courtney's hometown. It's about an hour and a half north of Memphis. And so, that's Cindy and Cynthia Crawford.
Yes, but not the Cindy Crawford everyone thinks of.
Not the Cindy Crawford you're thinking of, but thinking about that Cindy Crawford. Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay. Some more like aspects of who Georgia Tann was. You need to know that in the early 1900s to 1940s, the rise of eugenics was becoming popular. And it promoted selective breeding and sterilization to create a superior society. The most common example that most people would know of eugenics is Hitler.
Adolf Hitler.
Hitler was trying to create the perfect breed of people.
That's what he thought in his head, was he could cleanse the world of imperfection and create a perfect human race.
Right. And so where Georgia Tann and eugenics comes into play is she also very much so believed in the ideologies of Margaret Sanger. And for those of you that don't know who that is, she was the founder of Planned Parenthood. And though she is accredited for a lot of good work with like feminist rights and promoting the rights of women, a lot of those endeavors were done in a more dark agenda. She primarily thought that if you could provide birth control, you could make abortions legal, that you could cleanse the world of low intelligence, poor, impoverished, and other racial groups of people. That was her main ideology. And Georgia Tann had her own way of trying to do this. Instead of just killing off all the babies or trying to breed into it, she thought if she could take them out of the environment and give them to wealthier people, it would create better upbringing class of people. Take them out of that poor environment, put them in a wealthy environment, and they become better people for society.
Yeah. And Margaret Sanger was Adolf Hitler's favorite American.
Yeah.
That's what he said. It was like, she influenced Adolf Hitler. Just a side note, we may do an episode on Margaret Sanger later. But
yeah, she'd be interesting to do a full episode on.
Without her, you would have never had Roe versus Wade. And the body autonomy and all that stuff. I'm like definitely not saying there's nothing good that came out that didn't come out of the woman, but she definitely belonged to the woman's chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. Like she was out there in left field, man.
And people like Adolf Hitler and Georgia Tann, they did what they did because they believed in what she was promoting and heavily promoting.
I'm sure Adolf Hitler believed, what he believed as well. But as far as he was concerned, she was his favorite socialist in America.
Yeah. So with that being said, that's kind of the basis of where the work of Georgia Tann starts and what leads her to develop this very, very structured, organized child trafficking ring. You want to say anything else?
No, man. I think you covered it. I think I butted in enough. But
okay.
As far as that systematic kidnapping, I like the trafficking machine that she ran. Tann's network included nurses, social workers, judges, police officers, like doctors, anybody that she could put in her pocket in order to be able to get her agenda out. So there was so much demand for adopted children, but there was so little supply. So coming up with these kids, they had to get real creative. Yeah. And if, so they would often turn to people, they would call them like, the word headhunters coming to mind, but that's not exactly watchers. That's what they called them. People that would just stroll neighborhoods, find kids playing outside, keep an eye on those kids. If they weren't being checked on by their parents, they would call Georgia Tann. Georgia Tann would come down, offer them some ice cream and probably their first ride in an automobile. They would get in the automobile and they would never see their parents again. Misinformation. Mothers were told that the babies would die. Like, for instance, there was this one time when Georgia Tann was walking down the street. She saw a mother with a newborn, and the newborn was coughing, and its nose was running and stuff. And Georgia asked the mother, "Is that baby okay?" And the mother said, "Yeah, it's fine. It's just it's got a little sniffle. It's gonna be okay." And Georgia was like, "No, I'm an expert in with children. Take my word for it. It needs immediate care." The mother didn't have money for doctor's visit, so Georgia Tann took the baby, or offered to take the baby, pay for all the medical bills, and bring the baby back. But what happened was Georgia Tann took the baby and told the mother later that the baby passed away while it was at the hospital. And it's just a bunch of crazy shit like that.
Yeah, like sometimes it would all happen right in the hospital right after birth. The doctors that she had in her pocket would tell the mother that the baby had died during delivery or shortly after delivery. Even if they were conscious enough to know that the baby was alive when it was born, they take it to the nursery and something happens and the baby dies. And they tell the mother that Georgia Tann has offered to pay for all the burial. It's all taken care of, not to worry about it. And if they questioned that or wanted to do their own burial of their own child, they'd be told it had already happened. Georgia Tann had already taken care of it, and there was no baby to bury anymore. And those were taken to the orphanage. They also had instances where mothers would be under anesthesia, and they would have them sign paperwork telling them it was just routine hospital paperwork, when really it was a legal binding document saying with them relinquishing the rights to their child. And if they tried to go to court, they didn't have a leg to stand on. Their signature was on that paper, and Georgia Tann then had all custody rights of the child in the orphanage until she adopted them out.
Yeah. And then it was always poor, uneducated, and single mothers that were the primary targets. These were women that couldn't defend themselves in court. They didn't have a leg to stand on. She never tackled anybody that could afford to fight her back. It was always
unwed mothers,
Yeah.
young mothers,
Easy targets.
poor families. Yeah.
And if there was any original birth certificates or documentation, all that stuff would get destroyed by the doctors that she had on her payroll. And this would ensure that the children can never be traced. Like there, and there was often what was one of those ladies that contacted us said that the way they found out was like, went to go get a passport.
Yeah, at age 48, her mom needed a passport and she couldn't get it because she didn't have any actual documentation of her birth. She had no birth certificate. She had no social security card. She always thought something was kind of odd with the adoption, but her mother, the one that was adopted, her adopted mother, would not really tell anything until she was on her deathbed. She finally confessed that she had adopted her and she didn't know what was going on, where she actually come from, that there were no documents. She had no documents on that child, no adoption papers, no birth certificate, no anything when she paid for that child.
And sometimes when a mother would, she would repossess these children sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You know, like
if they weren't paying on time.
Yeah, if they were on a payment plan of some sort, because I mean, some of these babies she was selling for $30,000 and $40,000
in today's value, right?
I think, yeah,
I think it was like 1,000, 2,000, something like that.
Yeah, set them up on a payment plan. If they were late on the payment, she'd go get the babies. But every once in a while, she would also run a Cincinnati shuffle on these mothers. And what I mean by that, if you haven't seen the movie, that's an old movie, but she would go back to these people who had paid and said, hey, the aunt showed up. She's demanding that she has access to this child and she wants custody of the child, but for a nominal fee, I can make all this go away.
My lawyers will take care of this.
Yeah. So she would just milk them for more money. And she was a greedy, like little wench, right? I mean, like it was purely money driven, but
at the same time, probably some trying to steal till he died, impress her father.
Possibly. And something else to note is there are survivors, some children that were old enough to remember being in Georgia Tann's home that remember the sexual molestation and the sexual assaults.
And the malnourishment.
Yeah. And, they have stories about how if they did bring a baby home from the hospital and it didn't meet the criteria of a paying customer, that Georgia Tann would just like leave it outside until it either died of hypothermia or a heat stroke.
Yeah. Heat exhaustion, hunger.
Yeah. Just, just forget about the baby. Just leave it outside. It's estimated that 500 or 5,000. Yeah. It was about 500
were buried on that property.
Babies were buried on the property. The building is no longer there. So in 1943, Georgia Tann adopts her probably lover. It's her lifelong childhood friend, Ann Atwood. And this is the person that she's going to leave all of her wealth to. Even though she does have that daughter, June, she's going to leave all of her wealth to a lady named Ann Atwood. And at the time of the inheritance, I suppose you would say, or trying to collect the inheritance, she was Ann Atwood Hollingsworth. And it's believed that she took the last name of some guy that got her pregnant that passed away. So
it would appear that she was widowed instead of a...
That's right. So she wouldn't have, like, it would just alleviate all the complications of being a woman and trying to collect an inheritance, which is ridiculous. But.
And being a woman of that time and being a mother unwed.
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff. But she, Ann Atwood would be a accomplice to Georgia Tann until for about 7 years there. I guess on paper. But actually, Ann Atwood was working with her in Mississippi as well. So she was probably working with her the entire time.
Right.
We don't actually know, but we do know that she was working with Ann in Mississippi. Then Ann moved with her to Memphis.
Yeah. And I'm not real sure, if 1943 is when she actually started working with her. like in the place if Anne had a role before then, but we do know that's when she adopted her.
That's when she adopted her.
Yeah.
And it was like that was pretty common back then. You know, if you were gay or lesbian or whatever, they would have just adopt
Adult adoption.
Adult adoption, yeah. And I'm not sure why, but I guess it's
legal means of being able to live with one another. I believe, like
without actually being married.
Right.
Okay.
Kind of. They called it sister adoptions.
Okay, sister adoptions.
And it just legalized 2 adult people of the same gender living under the same household.
Well, there's some books that were written about Georgia Tann. I believe Pearl S. Buck is one of them, and that might be the book. I didn't write this down, but that might be the book. Is what it's called, Before We Were Yours. If that's not it, man, you look up that title, Before We Were Yours, and that's a pretty good book. Me and Courtney both read it.
Yes, that was a good book.
It's based on a true story, which brings me to the Changeling, which is a 2008 film starring Angelina Jolie. And in that film, Angelina Jolie, her character, this is also based on a true story. And it doesn't necessarily tie to Georgia Tann, but it possibly could. And it's like a brain tickler to me. But like, Angelina Jolie comes home from work, finds out her son Walter is missing. She files a report. The police go so far to even say she's crazy and she might not have ever even had a kid. They say, we interviewed the neighbors. The neighbors never even seen a kid. But she doesn't give up. She keeps on fighting, tooth and nail. 3 or 4 years later, the police wind up bringing her a kid to shut her up. And the kid does resemble Walter, but she knows it's not her kid. At first, I think she wants to believe it's her kid, but it evidently is not her kid. But they uncovered Walter was murdered in some sort of
chicken coop murders.
Yeah, and that was in California, and this was in like 1928, 29, something like that. So this would have been like right there at the peak of when Georgia Tann was definitely getting some kids into California. So Walter, that likely didn't have anything to do with Georgia Tann. He was probably kidnapped and taken by the person who murdered him. But the child that just popped up, that was seemingly ordered,
very specific characteristics.
Yeah, with the same, same characteristics, same hair color, same eye color, skin tone, stuff like that. Freckles, just stuff like specificities.
Yeah, it's like somebody went through there. I need a kid with this, and this, and it was delivered to them. Like who did this child get taken from?
Yeah, to
try to give to this other child, and the authorities were involved with it.
Yeah,
like how did that happen?
And the authorities were telling her in the movie, like, you got your kid back, and she was like, no, it's not my kid. It was like, well, you got a kid back. Isn't that good enough? You're like, even the authorities.
Right, just take a kid.
It's a kid. I mean, like, even if it's not your kid, it's a kid. You should be happy. So like, it's almost like the authorities knew that no, this isn't the kid, but hopefully it'll shut this woman up because she's getting national coverage because that woman was rich enough to fight back. So this did bring some attention to abducted children at that point. But like I said, just a brain tickler. Doesn't really have anything necessarily to do with Georgia Tann, but it seemed like a child popped up that was just handpicked off of a menu with all these characteristics. And the only player that we know that was playing that game at the time was Georgia Tann. So it's a good possibility that kid come from Memphis. Got a couple other names of interest. You got June Allison and Dick Powell adopted a daughter, Pamela, through Georgia Tann. I'm not familiar with either one of those. You got Lana Turner, and I have heard of that. I've heard that name. I think she was a movie star. Potentially adopted a child through Tann, through records remain unclear. And then you got Pearl S. Buck, the author. And of course, we've already mentioned Joan Crawford and Ric Flair. Mm-hmm. And Courtney, go ahead.
So at this point, shortly after the adoption of Ann Atwood, an investigation gets going in 49 by Governor Gordon Browning. And it exposed Tann's illegal practices and revealed that over 5,000 children were trafficked. Some of the findings we've discussed, they know there were several children that died within her care, whether it be from neglect, abuse, torture, because they weren't acting the way she wanted them to act, or they didn't present themselves the way she wanted them to present themselves to potential buyers. There's several stories of children that went through terrible time with her. And a lot of times the adoptive families, what they found out from the investigation and later in more modern day time, is a lot of the families didn't realize that they were participating in illegal adoptions. It was not something that was regulated. Remember, prior to the early 1900s, it was a stigma to even adopt. Then Georgia Tann come along and started promoting, using her political connections and really promoting how they could be doing the world or the U.S. a service by adopting these children. She turned it into this is what the wealthy class does. And that created the demand. And then the demand outweighed the
supply.
The supply, like Billy had stated earlier. And so she used her influence as far up as the president. Like, she had meetings with
Eleanor Rigsby. I mean, I'm sorry.
Eleanor Roosevelt and President Roosevelt. Like, she was that prominent that by the time anyone was investigating her, the roots ran deep, deep.
And we won't get into it here. There's no sense in it because we would just add another hour to it. But if you ever want to dig down a rabbit hole and you want to talk about this eugenics stuff, then you'll start looking into Prescott Bush and what's the Osborne guy's name?
Henry Fairfield Osborne.
Henry Fairfield Osborne. Huge guys, huge players when it comes to eugenics and huge supporters of Hitler. And, it's crazy because you start looking at some of these plans that you would put in place in order to be able to get eugenics and started, get them in a roll. You got like Margaret Sanger or Sanger's eugenics plan, but you also had a welfare system that you could put in place so you could keep a thumb on top of the people that the government was supporting. Yeah, the impoverished people. So you make welfare easy, make food stamps, all this stuff come around the 1933 era.
The
New Deal. And yeah, she definitely met face to face with Eleanor. And the only president that's ever been elected for 4 terms. He didn't serve 4 terms. It's, he served 3.
He died very early into his 4th term, but he was
6 or
elected.
7 days. Yeah, he was elected for the 4th term, but he died 6 or 7 days into it. So, he served 3 full terms. And that doesn't have anything to do with anything either. But up until that happened, it was like customary for a president just to step down after the 2nd term, after he took advantage of being voted in 4 times in a row and didn't really show any signs of
stepping down
for the 5th term either. The Congress got involved and changed the law before anybody else was
set term limits then.
Yeah.
So as far as this investigation goes, they did find out that everything she was doing was illegal. She was profiting a whole lot of money off these orphans or these kidnapped kids. And but before she could be tried, she wound up dying of uterine cancer
in 1950.
Yeah. And so the investigation started in 1949. By 1950, she's dead.
She didn't. They said that she didn't even know that she had been found out before she passed away. I think the investigation was complete and they were ready to take action. And a couple of days later, she passed away, in her home. So she did. she died thinking that nobody ever really found her out.
Yeah. And because of what the investigation uncovered, the amount of prominent people in the community, the local
Did
community.
we talk about E.H. Crump at all?
Yeah, we brought him up that he
Okay.
was the mayor and he was in with her on it. And so you had the mayor involved, you had several judges, and these judges would do things like side with Georgia Tann when parents actually would try to fight it and they go to court. Either the court would deem them unfit parents or have falsified documents that they knew were falsified from Georgia Tann showing that they had given up their rights, or that they were neglecting the children or abusing the children in some way. The court system was working with her to legally take these children away from the parents that fought them, trying to get their children back.
Within the 27 years that she operated in Memphis, if you were poor and you had children, it was a lottery. You know, like if you couldn't afford to fight it in court, like you hope for the best outcome for your family, because the powers to be were definitely not on your side.
Right.
You know,
the doctors, lawyers, judges. So when this investigation opened up this can of worms, the Tennessee legislature decided, hey, let's make all this go away. Let's sweep this under the rug. This is way too many political figureheads.
Nobody ever got charged for anything.
They wound up mass legalizing all the adoptions, all the illegal adoptions that she had done, then sealed all the records. And it took until the 90s for some of those records to start being unsealed, where people could start looking for their families.
Yeah.
So like the state of Tennessee was very corrupt in this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because that's not just Shelby County at that point.
No.
That is the state legal system.
I mean, it was in the federal level.
The
federal level was covering her ass too.
Yeah,
I mean,
because they tried to get the money back from Ann Atwood that on the through the court system.
And the Supreme Court shut that down. They were like, you need to stay away from that.
Yeah, you don't have any right to that.
That's a federal Supreme Court, not the Tennessee state
right
Supreme Court or whatever. That's the federal,
the U.S. Supreme Court,
probably under the advice of a president or something.
Yeah,
or I don't know,
or somebody with enough pull. But like some of the people we didn't mention that we know of that were customers there was a New York either mayor or governor. I want to say it was the New York governor at the time, adopted children from her. So, I mean, it's not just the political heads in the state of Tennessee that were involved or partook in these adoptions or helped with them. Like, it was all over the place. Big name celebrities, political heads in other states. Like I said, all the way up to the White House. She was in there presenting her case to the White House, man. She probably as much of a criminal network as a lot of
Al
the
Capone.
mob.
Yeah. That's exactly where my mind went. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of mafioso, you know, I mean, really, I mean, it's she had a ring and like some of the people that were so high up, and we're talking about some of the wealthiest people that Memphis has ever seen. Like if you're traveling on I-40 and you're going west from say like Nashville to Memphis and you want to stay on I-40, when you get to Memphis city limits, you're going to have to take 240 around. You can't just stay on 40. And when you get on 240, you're going to cross over Crump Boulevard. And that intersects with Elvis Presley Boulevard. I mean, we're like, Crump was not a no-name passerby. This guy built Memphis.
Right.
You know, he turned Memphis into the machine that it is. I mean, he definitely had a hand in industrializing Memphis for what it is today. So E.H. Crump was a big name. You know,
probably one of the first supporters of hers too. Like, knew what was going on and supported it.
Most likely, you know, because he
was getting money off of it.
Yeah,
and that's all that mattered.
It was her dad's political pull from Meridian, Mississippi. You know, she was born in Philadelphia, but that they operated in Meridian, Mississippi. That's not that far away.
Yeah, and she was buried in Hickory, Mississippi.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. But go ahead.
All right. So even though the investigation occurred and the Tennessee Children's Home Society was closed down in 1950, this story was far from over. You got at least 5,000 families that had no idea what had happened to their children. The children had no idea. Most of them probably didn't even know they were adopted until much later in life. And there's still adopted kids out there that are trying to figure out their family history, trying to find their parents, if they're even still alive. Some of them have been fortunate enough to find them before they die. And if you watch some of the videos, it's heartbreaking seeing some of these mothers well into the age and finally getting to see their grown kids at 40 and 50-year-old children. Like it's heartbreaking. So this is still affecting a lot of people. Like when we found the connections on 23andMe, that wasn't maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the last one was like 2022.
Yeah,
so it was just a few years back.
These
Like
are people that are just a little bit older than my parents who were born in the mid 50s.
yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm guessing it was their parents
Right.
that were affected or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it definitely is still affecting families today, you know.
So they don't know their blood family. They don't know, like, even the simple things of like medical history. They don't know what they may need to know because their life was literally ripped away and just handed over somewhere else. And there's so many families that are still like, I wish we knew what happened to them. I wish I knew where they ended up. They know they were taken. They know it happened through the Tennessee Home Society, Children's Home Society. But because she was so good at falsifying documents, getting rid of any evidence, it is very hard for them to trace it.
Yeah, things like 23andMe has actually made it kind of helpful because, you know, there's the DNA matches. So, like, if you don't know where you come from, you pay $75. I'm not saying 23andMe is a really good idea now. I think they've taken all that data and sold it to China for whatever reason. I'm not sure why China wanted it, and I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do with it. But
Ancestry, I think, was involved in all that too.
Yeah.
Just about anything we can do, somebody's going to get their hands on it.
Yeah. But regardless, you know, if you don't know where you're from, you know, like that's pretty alluring to be able to you know, pay $75, get a blood test, see who you're related to.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of an interesting tool, you know, especially for people who like to do genealogy like you.
Yeah.
And for people who have no idea where their background is. So, like, you know, with tools like that, they're finally being able to find out, even though they don't have any paperwork that's been saved.
Right. And as far as modern day adoption goes, some of her legacy still lives on in our modern day adoption system. Even looking into the legal aspects, because of Georgia Tann, adoption records become sealed most states.
Yeah.
They still, to this day, most states continue to have sealed adoption records. So it takes out the transparency when everything is sealed away and nobody can look at it. Do we know what's really going on?
Even still today in the legal system.
Right.
And outside of that, there's still, even though Georgia Tann was the pioneer, she was, you know, obviously the pilgrimage when it comes to black market adoption in the current world. I'm sure there's been a version of her before, and I'm sure there's been versions of her after. But in the modern world of families still being affected, she's definitely one of the key players that still have a heavy influence. But I don't know where I was going with that. Go ahead.
I think some of her legacy was probably definitely an eye-opener for more criminals.
Yeah.
To continue on making lots of money, because she would have been a multimillionaire in today's standards.
Yeah.
And that was from trafficking children to people who wanted them.
Well, they say that you can. I heard this as a statistic on the news one time when they were talking about drug dealing, And they were like, it used to be peddling pot and coke and pills and stuff like that. But like the big thing now is if you get your hands on a child, then you can use that child for labor. You can pimp that child out. And then when you're done with that child, you can, dissect that child and sell all its organs. And
So
it's I mean, like,
a money maker. Like, yeah, you
can make about $1 million per child. If 5,000 children disappeared under her reign, she'd be worth $5 billion.
Yeah, and that's scary. It's sickening. It's scary, but we know trafficking still goes on in modern day.
Oh, it's a big problem in modern day.
Yeah, I do feel like some of her stuff probably
still survives.
led into some of the mass trafficking that we have now. I'm not saying she's the sole responsibility of it.
No,
but I think she definitely made it into the highlights of news.
Yeah, she's a key player
that got people looking at it. Like,
and people are still adopting children in the same way that they were adopting children back then too. I mean, like, you can go through the legal system nowadays and spend $100,000 to adopt a child the correct way, or you can actually just
broker a deal online.
You can broker a deal online, with a mother that's expecting that doesn't want to keep the child for $30,000 or $40,000, and
there's brokers out there making the connections for you.
Excuse me, that was my fault. I don't know how loud that'll be in your speakers, but yeah, man. So we do have an interview coming up. Is that a good spot?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have an interview coming up with an individual, a very interesting individual that I met online. But he has worked with different agencies. He served in the military. He's been in departments that were over Homeland Security in terms of human trafficking, and child trafficking, and he's got stories, and so we got an interview coming up. We'll be able to talk to him this week or this weekend, hopefully, and looking forward to that. So there will be a part 2 of this.
And possibly a part 3 on the Margaret Sanger after.
Yeah.
Before or after.
We'll see. Yeah. And just if you've made it this far, listen, we're still looking for people to interview for the restaurant industry. We understand. We've had some interviews lined up, and, they've had to cancel because they've had to work. That's the thing about restaurant industries. A lot of these owners are working 70, 120 hours a week. And a lot of these servers are working several hours as well. So, we definitely understand that. But if you are a server, if you make your living, if you depend heavily on serving tables and the tips that you make, we would love to hear from you. Drop us an email at opexchangepod@gmail.com. And we can set this interview up via phone. You don't have to fly out anywhere or anything. It can be as much time as you possibly have. If you want to talk for 3 hours, we'll talk to you for 3 hours. But if you can only talk for 15 minutes, we'll greatly appreciate it. You can answer questions and give your point of view.
Yeah, and if there's anyone that would like to add anything to this series here over the trafficking and the Georgia Tann, please feel free to message us on our email. If you want to be a guest on the show, if you want to have your story told.
You got some stories to tell? Bring it.
Like we love to hear from people on that aspect as well.
That is 100% our goal here, is to exchange. Our operation is to exchange conversation and information and
perspectives and life experiences.
That's right. Courtney, you got anything else?
No, I think that's a wrap.
Okay, well, thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow or subscribe.
We're now on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon.
And YouTube? Let's get our RSS code. Okay. YouTube. And we will be getting video as soon as we possibly can. We're having some technical difficulties. This is like the third time we recorded this conversation. But we're going to have to go audio only for now. But we will be video before too long. We're working on it. You guys have a great one, and we will catch you next time.